a comparison driven by experience. But I won't do that. I thought it would perhaps be more helpful to briefly address the political moment in which we are regarding post and decolonial studies. I'm aware that there's no such thing as a kind of universal political zeitgeist. Despite globalization, I think discourses and debates vary a lot according to national context. In my case, as I moved, and that's probably one of the reasons why I had this interest for comparative studies, I moved as a kid from Sweden to Switzerland. So I'm living in French-speaking Switzerland, so there's a connection to debates in France. And I've been struck by an ongoing debate regarding the social sciences, and particularly some specific research fields in the social sciences. And I think that this discussion speaks to wider context, and that it makes post and decolonial studies more visible, and I think also more important. So what's going on? Some of you probably are aware that there's a vivid debate in France about the legitimacy and even the dangerosity of the social sciences right now. And worryingly, this debate does not only divide the right and left, but it divides also left-wing scholars among them. And this debate was launched in October last year by Jean-Michel Blanquer, the French Minister of Education. And I thought, and it seemed that this debate would fade away, but it has bounced back with declarations by another French minister, the Minister of Research, Frédéric Vidal, a few weeks ago at the end of February. So to give you a flavor of what is agitating French media and public space, I just will show you this, these two headlines. Can you see them? I hope. So on the left side, you have Le Figaro, a right-wing French daily newspaper, making a headline about how Islamo-leftism is gangrening and corrupting the universities. And on the right, you have Libération, a left-wing daily newspaper, addressing the same debate about Islamo-leftism and asking whether Frédéric Vidal, and this is obviously a pun, is losing her faculties. The storyline since October last year is French universities are corrupted by militant researchers whose work is unscientific and basically a matter of pure opinion. And these scholars are guilty, the ministers say, of Islamo-leftism. In other words, these are relativist leftists who excuse Islamism instead of condemning it. So they are complicit with Islamism, and they are complicit with terrorist attacks, such as the beheading of Samuel Paty, which was very emotional in France at the end of last year, a teacher in the Paris region. So they're complicit with that kind of terrorist attack. So for this reason, Frédéric Vidal, this Minister of Research, has launched an investigation now on Islamo-leftism and post-colonial studies in French universities to identify what is scientific and what is not. I personally really look forward to reading the report and how criteria of scientificity will be defined. So this position of the two ministers and the investigation launched by Vidal have been supported by in the newspaper Le Monde by 100 French intellectuals a few weeks ago, among which a series of well-known figures of the academic left. So actually the core targets of these denunciations are those scholars, actually very few in France, working in French universities on intersectionality, on race, and particularly on whiteness, as well as post and decolonial studies. And the reason why these research fields are specifically targeted is rather actually obscure when you try to understand why they are targeted in the media declarations. But I think it's not very complicated to read through the lines that post and decolonial studies in particular are seen as a threat to a Eurocentric view of modernity and universalism. And if you've read some of Achille Mbembe's publications, you will see how he, I think, rightly explains why this is particularly strong in France. In France, there's a direct link between research on class, race, and gender divisions and the mythical idea of a republican nation united by scientific truths and common values. In other words, describing the lines of fractures within society goes against a narrative of the nation, le roman national, the national novel, as we say in France. So why do I briefly mention this debate? Because I think this story is not only about a French specificity. What's happening, to use what the sociologist Eric Fassin has been saying about this, is those who dominate worry that there's so much discourse and analysis on domination. Intersectionality is worrying because it points not only to accumulated positions of disadvantage, but also to accumulated positions of advantage, including whiteness. Post-colonial studies question the legacy, as we know, of colonialism, but also specifically in contemporary discrimination, notably in the French banlieue. And decolonial studies question the universalism of concepts, theories, and methodologies. As you know, they locate their geohistory and question their reach. So what makes things worse, I think, in the present period for these critics of these studies, is that this research is no longer confined to some marginal and obscure academic circle. This research, actually our research, today informs social movements and the everyday discourse of people in the media. And in this context, the notions of Islamo-leftism in France or cancel culture in the US are invented to disqualify these discourses and question the public support for researchers in those fields and public funding for this research. So I think this debate, for which there are equivalents elsewhere in Hungary, in the US, for instance, make post and decolonial studies both more visible and even more important today. In other words, the performativity of post-colonial and decolonial studies, I think, is increasing, for better and for worse. And I think, and this gets me to the point of the workshop today, this makes methodological discussions of the type we're having in this workshop particularly important. How we dislocate social sciences and urban studies in this contested political moment is crucial. How we consistently show and not only affirm that a decolonial stance matters and bring new forms of understanding is very important. And it's important how we empirically ground our arguments. And this is not always the forte of post and decolonial studies. So I think all the 4 papers we will have this morning will try hard to respond to these important methodological questions and challenges. And I think we really should not underestimate the importance of these efforts that we will discuss in this workshop. I think they really do matter. And with this, I think I've used my 10 minutes and hopefully in a useful way, not talking about myself, but talking about things that matter in public space. So with that, I'll stop.